You're listening to Uncle Sam Saves America, a patriotic show for the average Joe.
With all of the Somali fraud news going on in the headlines today, I thought it would be appropriate to bring a little explanation in plain language, and that might be helpful for those who don't follow geopolitics. The Somali community in Minnesota has been in front and center in the news, as I'm sure you've seen, with stories ranging from immigration history to fraud cases to questions about national security. So we're going to break this down without any spin and try to understand what's really going on here. Now, first, we need to understand how the Somali population took hold in Minnesota. Right? Well, Somalia collapsed in 1991 due to civil war. They had no government, famine, anarchy, territory being fought over by warlords and terrorist groups. If you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, that's the conflict that I'm talking about. And after Somalia fell, the world opened up various refugee pipelines and the U.S. became a destination. Minnesota in particular became the hub because the resettlement agencies placed families there early on in the process. And once a community takes root and it grows, relatives join, networks expand, density builds. So by the mid-1990s, the Somali population was accelerating. Families were coming directly through refugee programs, and others moved in from states like New York and Texas. And they all moved in to join relatives in Minnesota. And that's how the Twin Cities kind of became the largest Somali community in the United States. Well, why did they pick Minnesota? Well, early on, it was because of jobs. Entry-level work in everything from meat packing to manufacturing to logistics. And the social services were very generous. They had strong social programs. They had nonprofits like the Lutheran Social Service and Catholic Charities who were helping them out. And so as the community became more dense, right, schools started adapting to that. Clinics started hiring Somali staff. Mosques were being built. And then once they were established, Minnesota became the easiest place for them to land and to survive. Now, Minnesota, of course, was not chosen for its climate. It was chosen because it became the logical hub. Liberal government, free benefits, a welcoming, self-segregated enclave of countrymen. What's not to like, right? So population kept growing through the 90s. Well, when President Bush came into office and 9/11 happened, the Somali immigration rate slowed to a crawl, mainly because Somalia is a Muslim state and also because they house one of the largest terror networks in Africa, Al-Shabaab. Their growth was pretty stagnant throughout the Bush years, but when Obama became president, Somali refugees admissions started to increase again, right? Nearly half of the non-U.S. born Somali population in the United States came here after 2010, and they were already radicalized because we had the war of terror going on for the whole previous decade, right? So when the Biden years come along, growth in that community continued, not just through new arrivals, but the original Gen Xers who showed up with the fall of Mogadishu. They started having children, which became, of course, natural citizens of the United States. And so now that community is a permanent fixture in Minnesota, and a lot of Minnesota's taxes and a lot of their economy depends on that Somali enclave. Well, in the Biden era, of course, we had COVID, and this is where all the fraud stuff comes in. And I'm not going to go over all of the fraud stuff. You've seen plenty of it in the news. But what I will say is that remittances to Somalia are huge. They run in the billions annually, and they go into areas that are controlled by Al-Shabaab. Taxes and extortion, and they all skim a profit off of the top of that. Even innocent transfers are going to get skimmed. One of the big suspects in this is, of course, Ilhan Omar. She's been on the news a lot lately. Now, although she's not been directly charged, she's under scrutiny. Several reports highlight staff involvement, right? Her deputy director, Ali Isi, with the Feeding Future program. In 2021, he's one of the ones who was involved. Other associates that were convicted, Salim Ahmed said, he's the co-owner of the Safari restaurant where Omar does her business. She's held her victory parties there before, and he was convicted of stealing millions through phantom meal sites. Omar's campaign and staff has ties to this venue and to these people. And then there's the legislation link. She introduced in 2020 the Meals Act, which is the very act that's been defrauded. And so she's looked at as maybe she kind of loosened oversight on the child nutrition programs to allow for this to happen. Right? Now, like I said, she's not been formally charged, but her staff and close associates are implicated in Minnesota's welfare fraud program, and her legislative role in loosening the oversight, whether or not prosecutors tie her directly, the political damage is mounting, and critics are calling for her already to be removed from office. And then again, she's up for election in next year, and some of them are going to demand that she be primaried. There's a lot of national security concerns that go along with this, though. Secretary Vincent, the Treasury Secretary, he said earlier this week that they're tracing and tracking the money, see where it's gone, to see whether the tax dollars of Minnesota's public assistance programs have made their way to the Al-Shabaab network, right? And Al-Shabaab is an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. They're a U.S. foreign designated terrorist organization, and they're based in Somalia. Somalia is their home. There's a high potential for their pipeline for diaspora funds. Diaspora is Somalis abroad, right? The diaspora funds coming from the U.S. Somali community, right? And these allegations have been kind of circled around for several years. This isn't necessarily a new thing. In 2019, Minnesota's own Office of Legislative Auditor said that they were unable to substantiate that money had went to Al-Shabaab, but he didn't rule it out, saying that it was completely possible that state funds might have been sent overseas and eventually found their way to terrorist hands. But this is where the social justice warriors jump in. On the left, community advocates warn that painting all Somalis with the same brush is going to cause a stigma. And most of them have lived in the United States for decades, contributing to the economy and to civic life, and that's true. And most of them have become naturalized citizens in the United States. But it's not painting a wide brush. When the Minnesota case was prosecuted federally, not at the state level, and it was focused on nonprofits and agencies rather than individuals broadly, right? And the overlap of fraud allegations with immigration policy and all of these kind of debates that are going on today are going to elevate this in mainstream media. But the truth is, the Somali community is indeed under renewed scrutiny, right, due to the Minnesota fraud scandal, and they should be, and I'm going to explain why. Now, before you start hating on me and claiming that I'm racist and that I'm a white supremacist and Uncle Sam is bad for America, let me state here that the Somali community, right, and activists always speak of painting with a wide brush, but there's nothing wrong with doing that when the highest ranking Somali member of Congress, right, has openly said that she and her people are Somalia first, right? That's in direct violation of the Constitution that she swore to uphold. In fact, all naturalized citizens, no matter where they come from in the world, right, pledge to let go of their past loyalties and affirm loyalty to the United States and to our Constitution. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But the bottom line is that the Somali population in America has loyalty problems. Let's start with Ilhan Omar, right? She took an oath of office. Every member of Congress swears to support and defend the United States Constitution. That's a legal and binding commitment. And she's aware of that. They're all aware of that, right? When a public official emphasizes another nation first, it undermines that very oath, right? Supporters are going to frame it as being cultural pride. But do you really believe that? From a national security perspective, even the perception of divided loyalty is going to be destabilizing, right? Intelligence and counterintelligence communities and their doctrines are going to see it all as potential conflicts of allegiance, and they're going to see it as a risk factor, right? Civil rights, protecting communities from collective blame is a cornerstone of U.S. law. But at the same time, national security doctrine always overrides if there's any credible evidence of fraud or divided loyalty, and we have that here in both of those particular cases, right? Painting with a wide brush stigmatizes entire communities, they say, but insurgents do blend into communities, and it's a trade-off between precision and prevention, okay? This is the collision between symbolic allegiance and constitutional duty. When officials or community leaders openly signal loyalty to another nation, it's going to feel suspicious, and that's going to transcend into civil rights debates. Security doctrine is blunt, right? Loyalty to the U.S. must be absolute. Omar is Generation X. She's a Somali immigrant who is a legal United States citizen. We saved her life. We gave her a home. We gave her an education, right? She achieved the ultimate American dream. So I don't understand all the hate for America. I don't understand the whole Somali first rhetoric, right? I understand that she might want to help her people, but why steal from the country that gave you the opportunity for everything to make that happen, right? Why not take your influence, your riches, your ideas, your policies, your philosophies, and return to Somalia as a freedom fighter? Why don't you step up, right, and lead your own country to providence, right? If you really want to be a hero for your people, and if you really care about your people, and if you're really Somalia first, why not do that, right? If you really wanted to help Somalia, you'd put together a plan, approach the greatest peace president of all time, right, and ask him for help in taking your country back. That would be gallant. That would be heroic, right? That would be a tale that would be told for generations. But no, you would rather hinder the country that saved your life after the worst collapse imaginable. That's what you'd rather do. Allegedly. All of this is alleged, folks. All of it's alleged. But why paint the community with a wide brush? Well, when you consider the large amount of money that Somalia receives from their diaspora, right? And since most of them are blue collar, it ain't coming from donations, right? This needs to be investigated, and the truth is that nobody really cares if a community feels stigmatized when they're home of one of the biggest terror networks in the world, Al-Shabaab, right? The Somali diaspora does send significant remittances back home, and those flows are critical to Somalia's economy. Almost 20 to 30% of Somalia's GDP depends on those remittances from the diaspora, okay? And when it comes down to civil rights versus security, community leaders are going to argue that stigma harms the law-abiding Somali Americans. But the national security doctrine is blunt. If there's a credible risk for fraud or for terror financing, then the investigations are going to happen. Scrutiny is going to happen, right? When the stakes involve terrorism, agencies are going to broadly profile. That's just the way it is. That's the way it has to happen. 9/11 taught us that lesson, a lesson we will not forget. But here's the thing, right? It's not discrimination when there's a reason for it. We have reason with the potential fraud and the potential funding of terror, okay? And this is where I lose patience with the liberals. And this is where I say, if you don't like it, leave. And I'm not saying that out of racism. I'm not saying that out of white supremacy. I'm not saying that out of any prejudice whatsoever. I just believe that a person needs to honor where they come from, or they need to leave, right? Discrimination is acting against a group purely based on their identity without any evidence or risk. But we have both evidence and risk in this particular situation, right? Domestic security is built on the principle that potential risk is going to override perception, right? The oath of office and the allegiance to the Constitution are non-negotiable. If you are a U.S. naturalized citizen, you took an oath of allegiance, and it's very explicit about loyalties, right? When someone becomes a citizen, right, they swear to put America first above any other nation or allegiance. right? That comes straight from the oath. I'm going to quote a couple of pieces of it for you here, right? I hereby renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty. In defense of that, they say that I will support and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true allegiance and faith to the same. Okay? That means no divided loyalty, right? That means the Constitution first. That means security priorities, right? Saying things like Somalia first is only going to raise questions. It's only going to be divisive. And Ilhan Omar is smart enough to know that, right? The citizenship oath, which she also took in addition to her constitutional oath as a congressperson, right? The citizenship oath is designed to prioritize loyalty to America above all else, right? It's not symbolic. Any hint of foreign first rhetoric is going to clash with that oath, and it's going to trigger suspicion. And it happens across the entire community, and it's going to. Why? And I'll tell you why. If you don't want to be judged as part of a group, then don't segregate yourself into one. Segregation is what Martin Luther King fought against, and nowadays everybody wants to do it. It's stupid, then, if you're going to do that, to complain about profiling. You see, a single Somalian family living in Burnt Skillet, Arkansas, right? They would just be seen as a black family unless they specifically drew attention to the fact that they're from Somalia. And even then, with situations like what's going on today, their friends and neighbors would be sympathetic, even the ones on the conservative side, right? Why? Because that family has successfully integrated into the community. That was Martin Luther King's vision, right? King fought against enforced segregation, against laws and customs that kept black Americans apart and unequal, right? His dream was integration, equal footing, equal civic identity. But modern identity politics today, they emphasize distinctiveness, right? Cultural enclaves, hyphenated identities, separate institutions, right? That's voluntary segregation, not imposed by anyone but themselves, right? It's not like government imposed reservations like when we screwed over the Native Americans. No. This is self-selected identity, right? And once you make that choice, there's going to be consequences that follow. And this is exactly the fracture that Martin Luther King spoke against, right? He warned about segregation breeding suspicion. And he fought to erase that, but modern identity politics is just undoing all of his work voluntarily. And that's why my patience runs out. That's why Americans' patience run out. Because the complaint about profiling rings hollow when separation is self-chosen. When a community chooses to cluster, it becomes a collective identity in the whole public eye, right? Public perception is going to see you as a collective cultural identity separate because you chose to separate yourselves, right? And that's going to attract the scrutiny, especially if fraud and terror financing concerns are involved. Right? But by contrast, you take that single Somalian family living in Burnt Skillet, Arkansas, but they've went and they've blended into the broader community. And so they're not going to trigger that same kind of spotlight. They're judged as individuals and on their merit as they should be, rather than part of an outside group. But they chose to do that. They chose to live the American dream and not hide away in some enclave, right? Agencies don't hassle individual families, isolated families, because there's no pattern, there's no pipeline. But when a community builds a distinct enclave, it's going to create a target of interest. That's just the way it is, right? That's not discrimination, it's pattern recognition. White Americans do the same thing. If you ever go to Panama or if you go to Costa Rica, you'll see that white Americans have segregated themselves into an enclave, and instead of trying to blend into the broader community. Right? Voluntary segregation carries collective consequences. If a group chooses to stand apart, they can't then claim immunity from identity profiling when national security concerns arise. That's the trade-off. Identity enclaves invite collective judgment in ways that integrated individuals do not. Right? So the bottom line is this: most Americans, they don't care what color you are, where you come from, or what your religion is. Right? Most Americans do care that you come into the country and obtain your citizenship the correct way, and that you're loyal to the place that you now call home. Most Americans want you to integrate. They want you to join us. We want you to be part of us. We want you to partake in the American dream and be as successful as you can possibly be. But don't stand apart from us. Don't blame us for your misgivings, and don't accuse us of prejudice whenever you're the ones who choose to self-segregate. And don't steal from us. Don't use our kindness to potentially fund evildoers back home. Anyway, thanks for listening.
You're listening to Uncle Sam Saves America, a patriotic show for the average Joe.